Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The New Wave of STEM-Focused Schools. My name is Eric Roblin. I'm a reporter here at Education Week, and I'm pleased to be moderating today's discussion. Underwriting for the content of this webinar comes from the GE Foundation. Amid all the attention to improving education in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math, one intriguing development is the rapid growth in the number of STEM-focused schools around the country. Fundamentally, these schools are seen as a strategy to both boost student knowledge and interest in the STEM fields. This webinar is inspired by an Education Week story that I wrote last fall about STEM schools. I was struck by how many have recently opened up around the country, from Ohio and Tennessee to North Carolina and New York. In fact, I visited a brand new STEM school in Raleigh, North Carolina that's housed on the campus of NC State University. Historically, STEM schools have tended to target the top math and science students in a particular state or district. But the new wave has a broader reach, with many of the schools explicitly intended to serve populations that have historically been underrepresented in the STEM fields, whether African Americans, Hispanics, females, or low-income students. I'm delighted to be joined today by two insightful guests. One who will bring the lens of a national researcher, the other a local perspective through his experience at a STEM school in Texas. Together, we'll explore the rationale for STEM schools, what they are, and what they look like in practice. We'll also examine the promise they hold for improved learning, as well as some of the challenges of finding success. So I'm pleased to be joined today by Sharon Lynch, a professor of science education at George Washington University. She's also the principal investigator on a research project funded by the National Science Foundation to study STEM schools. Our second presenter is Stephen Zitkus, the founding principal of Manor New Technology High School in Manor, Texas, a STEM school that opened in 2007 and has since gained national recognition. As always, we want this webinar to be an interactive experience, so please feel free to ask questions at any time during the hour we have. Simply type into the Ask a Question window on your webinar display. We'll do our best to address as many as we can in the time allowed. Also, this webinar will be available on demand within 24 hours of today's event, and the PowerPoint slides will also be available to download. You'll be receiving an email with a link to the archive and slides once they're ready. You'll also be able to access the webinar archive from our homepage at www.edweek.org. Now that's enough from me. Let's begin our discussion. First, I'd like to welcome again Sharon Lynch to get us started. Take it away, Sharon.
Thanks very much, Eric. The focus of the slideshow that I'll be doing is on STEM-focused high school. In addition, I'll be providing a brief overview of some exciting new NSF-funded research studies on the topic. Next slide. Before I begin, I'd like to give credit where credit is due to the educators who've been quietly developing STEM-focused schools over the last several years. Much of what we have learned about these schools come from state and school websites, YouTube, and atypical forms of scholarly documentation, as well as scholarly work. Viewers will see some of these schools and students pictured in our slides. Our goal is mainly to reflect these exciting new schools and what they've developed through grassroots efforts aided by foundations and businesses. In some cases, the schools are organized through state STEM models for innovative education, such as those in North Carolina, Ohio, or Texas. We also draw on the High Tech High network that has advanced its own innovative model. So from the very beginning, thanks to the educators who are at work today energizing STEM education. Next slide. Next slide, please. So our first question is, what is a STEM-focused school? Next. STEM in its simplest form is an acronym for the fields of science, math, engineering, and technology. STEM is often associated with a recognized economic need for improved performance in STEM fields and worries about the overall mediocre level of U.S. STEM education. There's no common definition for STEM education that we've been able to find, but the one provided here seems to capture what may be going on in STEM-focused high school. This definition explicitly includes interdisciplinarity, rigor, real-world applications to connect STEM learning in school with the community and the economy, and the recognition that STEM literacy is for all. Next slide, please. What is a STEM-focused school? Next slide. Historically, most of us are probably familiar with selective STEM-focused high schools, which have been around since the beginning of the 20th century. They have rigorous admissions requirements and are designed for students who have already demonstrated considerable intelligence, achievement, and motivation to pursue science and mathematics. Many have a reputation for excellence, and their students do astounding work while still in high school. The Bronx High School of Science and Thomas Jefferson High in Northern Virginia are two examples that come to mind. The first residential school of this sort was the North Carolina School for Science and Math and Science. There are many magnet schools that were designed in the 1980s to stabilize population shifts and attract STEM-talented students to diverse communities, and many have been highly successful in STEM education. Next slide. The schools that we are studying are a new type of school called inclusive STEM-focused high schools. They're designed for regular students who simply want to concentrate on STEM subjects. They may be local or magnet schools. Some are charter schools. They have an open admissions process with few requirements. Admissions may be by lottery. Their goal is to increase participation of minority students in STEM, and that can include low SES students, African American students, or Hispanic students. Some of these schools focus on students who are the first generation in their families to attend college, and we'll simply refer to these students as first-generation students from now on. Gender also is an issue for STEM education. These schools are often born of community efforts, and communities can include business and industry, museums and science centers, colleges and universities. Next slide. Why are we seeing the rapid growth in the creation of such schools? Next slide. Concern for better STEM education has been raised by business and industry leaders, the National Governors Association, private foundations, and legislators on the local, state, and national levels. U.S. Congressman Frank Wolf sparked the study of STEM education via the National Science Foundation, and that work can be found in a new report published by the National Research Council. In September 2010, President Obama issued a challenge to the U.S. educational system to create 1,000 new STEM-focused schools over the next decade, including 200 new high schools. Next slide. Interestingly, students and their families are aware of high-paying, intellectually stimulating job and career opportunities in STEM. STEM careers are part of the information economy, and the rewards are substantial. Interestingly, parents also see national economic competitiveness and innovation as products of STEM education, and they want their children to participate. Next slide, please. Structural inequalities in the United States are actually worsening. This is another reason to look for better education solutions to students who do not have the same access to critical opportunities in STEM compared with their more affluent peers. STEM-focused high school experiments create these opportunities in new and innovative ways. Next slide. STEM-focused high schools focus on preparation for students in STEM, but that's not enough. If students find STEM uninspiring and boring, they will not pursue it. If they think that STEM isn't for them, they'll find other pathways. Consequently, STEM-focused schools are also designed for inspiration, production, and connections to the real world. First-generation students are exactly those students who may require better reasons to pursue STEM education, and they may need supports to help them toward that success. Next slide, please. So how many of these schools are there across the country? Next slide. The 2008 report by Barbara Means and the group at SRI, funded by the Gates Foundation, seems to be the most complete survey of both selective and inclusive STEM-focused schools. These researchers located over 300 such schools from 35 states in the District of Columbia across the United States. 203, or 66%, responded to the survey. The selective schools tended to be older and better established and much larger. However, 55% of the respondents were from inclusive STEM-focused schools. These schools are newer, opened in the last 10 years. Of these, about 43% were standalone schools and 38% were a school within a school. Over half received some sort of financial impetus from the Gates Foundation, but often through a local funding institution. For these schools, about 58% of the students qualify for free and reduced lunches, and student populations are about one-third African American or one-third Hispanic. There's probably many times that number of schools that exist today in 2012. Next slide, please. Okay, next slide. What's the potential of STEM-focused schools? Well, they're going to create a larger number of students who are truly STEM qualified and who pursue STEM majors and careers. They change the identity of who does STEM. They provide opportunity structures, not just coursework, but mentoring, support structures, real-world experiences, early college admissions, which lead to STEM confidence and success. They provide an influx of new ideas for STEM education, and they provide choice. However, there's been only 2 published research studies that we've been able to find that provide some evidence that STEM-focused schools, either selective or inclusive, may be effective. Neither study can provide a slam-dunk report of success, and both are in the preliminary stages of analysis. It's very difficult to conduct high-quality longitudinal studies, but these studies give us some clues about these schools, and we can talk more about this later if there's time. Next slide, please. A major concern, we're out of order. We have a problem slide. There we go. Thanks. A major concern among STEM-focused school advocates is that it's easy enough to add the STEM school label to a school without changing much of anything that goes on inside the school. This can dilute the impact of exemplary schools that have carefully designed new models. Lessons learned from research on charter schools show that it's difficult to conduct studies that are valid. That's because it's hard to find adequate comparison schools and students, and the issue of student choice further muddies the water about what contributes to the success of an innovative school. Next slide, please. We have new research efforts to study STEM-focused schools. Next slide. And if you go one more slide over, this is the Osprey Project. The Osprey Project has nothing to do with these birds, but we think these birds are fine examples of birds that create structures that help develop and nurture their young. In our project, we are going to start out by selecting 12 well-established STEM-focused schools and compare them using cross-case analyses. In order to do that, we start with 10 suspected critical components, but hope to capture other important elements and variations. Next slide, please. These are our candidate critical components. If there were more time, we could go over each one, but there isn't. I'm watching my time and making sure that Steve has a chance to talk about his school. But these are the things that we've managed to take out of the literature that seem to be healthy candidate components that may be in common in many of the STEM-focused schools we've been looking at. Next slide. What we intend to do is to look at these 12 schools, each one, looking at their design, their implementation practices, and student outcomes. all of these schools vary by context, and it will be important to find out which critical components they have in common and the contextual factors that make the models either transportable or scalable. Next slide. Our intended outcomes are listed above, but most of all, we want to understand how these new schools create opportunity structures that support the development of students underrepresented in STEM, but who want to succeed in high school and college and go on to STEM careers and jobs. Next slide. There's more to come, and this is the related work. The Osprey study next will look at, in its second stage, 4 of the high schools and compare them with their comprehensive high school counterparts. And we'll be doing case studies from the students' points of view. In addition, there's a companion NSF study led by Barbara Means of SRI that plans to follow a large number of students in STEM-focused high schools for the next 5 years, from grades 9 through first year of college, and compare the progress with students in carefully selected comparison schools. This is the beginning of an effectiveness study. Together, this pair of studies can provide the underpinnings for understanding whether inclusive STEM-focused schools are effective, for whom they're effective, and under what conditions. Thanks to Eric and Ed Week for giving us the opportunity to talk with you about these ideas in our upcoming work. We hope the audience found the presentation interesting and provocative, and I know you're going to enjoy hearing from Steve Zipkes, who will talk about his own school that he's helped to build and describe how it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. Before we move on, I'd like to mention that if you're interested in future EdWeek events, in April we have a live event scheduled called Scaling Up Student Success. You can join Alan Blankenstein, Alan November, and other key education leaders for an interactive day focused on fundamentally scaling up the effective management of schools district-wide. Now, back to our panelists, and now I'm going to hand it over to Stephen Zipkes.
Well, thank you, Eric, for this opportunity to address this critical issue of STEM schools, as more and more schools and districts are looking at opening STEM schools. Before I begin, I'd like to give a shout-out to all our students and our gurus of knowledge here at Manor New Tech and at Manor ISD. We're a COSN 21st Century District, and I appreciate the opportunity the district's given me to pursue this. So to begin with, Manor New Tech, we are a STEM school. We opened 5 years ago. We were one of the few handful of STEM schools in the state of Texas, and then the Texas High School Project. With the Texas High School Project, we launched additional STEM schools, and I think in the state now we're sitting at about 52 STEM schools within the state of Texas right now. So what is Manor New Tech? Well, first of all, we're a public high school, and our focus, I'd like to say that our invisible focus is STEM. So when I opened the school, at the time, Texas had a 3x3, where students had to graduate with 3 maths and 3 sciences. And at the time when I opened the school 6 years ago, the state changed to 4 maths and 4 sciences. Well, at the time, most STEM schools, that was their calling card to be a STEM school. So I said, well, what's the difference between a STEM and a comprehensive high school at the time? So looking at the curriculum, looking at the students coming in, I looked at changing everything up. And so our students are actually graduating with 5 years of math, 5 years of science, 2 years of engineering, and most students graduate with 6 math and 6 sciences. And we're able to do that because we run a trimester schedule. One thing with our district high school had been low performing 3 out of 4 years, and so had our middle school. And our district knew that we needed a change. We needed something. And so bringing our students in to a STEM school, that wasn't really our focus to say, we're going to open a STEM school, so we hope everybody comes and applies to math and science. That really wasn't going to happen. But what we wanted to do is reach those underserved youth, and what we talked about was a different way to deliver instruction. What we had been doing was not working, and it hasn't worked. So what we looked at was project-based learning. And so we shifted a whole pedagogical shift in the delivery of instruction to make STEM exciting, make it relevant, make it hands-on, and from the student's perspective, make it meaningful. And finally, we're a new tech school. Well, what does that mean? We belong to a consortium of schools. There are 86 schools in the National New Tech Network from New York to Hawaii. And we all focus on project-based learning. Now, I have a lot of people come through this school, probably about 5,000 visitors in 5 years. And they say, well, we do projects. But when they come in and they see the projects and the structure of the projects, that it's not doing projects, because there's a big difference between doing project and project-based learning. When you do project-based learning, the teacher is no longer pushing information out to the students. The students, we give breadcrumbs, and then the students pull information from all types of areas and research. Our students average between 60 to 65 projects each a year. They have 5 projects going on simultaneously. And that includes our math and our science. We are a one-to-one school. What that means is a little different than most people. What we say one-to-one is when a student goes into a classroom, they have access to technology. And for us, technology is the invisible tool. It's not what makes the school, but it enhances the project and keeps the students engaged, and it brings in the student perspective, because they come from an era where they were born and raised with technology and they're digital natives, where we weren't. And finally, we integrate classes. Most of our upper division math and sciences are integrated, and all of our humanities are integrated. So let's talk about our enrollment. We're about 345 students, grades 9 through 12. Our numbers have dropped a little bit compared to our district, where our district is 82% free and reduced, and we're at 54%. We know we're higher because high school students don't turn in the forms. But for sure, we're over 50% first-generation college-bound students. What does it take to come into Manor New Tech? Nothing. It's a blind lottery. However, students do have to apply, so it is a school of choice. But the application, the only thing on the application is your name and address. So there are no requirements as grades, GPA, anything else like that, as long as you're promoted to the 9th grade, because we don't offer any 8th grade classes. But we don't focus solely on curriculum. In fact, I would say curriculum is may only be 20 to 35% of a student's grade. We look at learning outcomes. Our school is based upon 9 learning outcomes, and the learning outcomes are integral part of every single project. Students need to know these. In fact, knowing where our students came from, it's important that these learning outcomes are stressed. So let me give you an example. We know students came here from a low-performing middle school and a low-performing high school. My thought process is, what can we do to let these students have success and to move on to college? Well, obviously, right now, their GPAs and their curriculum, we had large learning gaps. And that was why we implemented the trimester schedule. And sure enough, these learning outcomes have helped our students get into colleges of their choice. But these are real-world learning outcomes that I know for a fact that businesses want. I am sitting in the heart of semiconductor country here in Austin, and we have the HR directors from the semiconductor companies come and tell us. They're not looking for somebody to graduate to come in that has all this content, because they will teach them what they need to know. However, they have to have the basic skills down. But what they can't teach them is collaboration, critical thinking, a strong work ethic. And these are things that the businesses are looking for. And this is what we teach our students in every single project. I need to mention that after every project, our students have to present. and they present about 80% of the time to an external panel. And this is a significant impact on the students and their growth. The comprehensive high school, a student may give 10 to 12 speeches their entire high school career unless they're in speech or debate. Our students, on an average year, give 60 to 65 speeches. By the time they graduate, they've given over 200 speeches. Let's look at the curriculum. As you can see, I told you all of our humanities are team taught, and so are our upper division math and sciences, and then some of our theater and digital media literacy. And this was designed from the very beginning because we wanted to make the curriculum exciting and relevant for the students, not just sit and get and regurgitate information, but to take real-world situations from projects and create an outcome at the end of that project, a product that shows the application of the knowledge they learned. And so integrating that curriculum, most of our classes are team taught. Well, what does that mean, team taught? What that means is it's not 45 minutes yours and 45 minutes mine. We take the state standards from both curriculum and we put them together to create a project. And so at the end of that project, the student receives credit in both of the contents. You'll find very few textbooks around our school. We use them for secondary resources only. So we don't open chapters of books. What we do is we launch projects. And we launch projects with an entry document that is a hook and that gives breadcrumbs to the students. And it excites the students. It engages them. And it gives them breadcrumbs. And from that entry document, students then have to answer what are the no's and then what do they need to know. And that's a working document that students use throughout their projects. But one of the most important pieces of any project is the rubric. Now, I will tell you, a lot of people think project-based learning is fluff. And the reason is because they want to know where the accountability is. Well, we knew that from the beginning. And being a STEM school, we had to focus not only on the content, but the standards. So we developed a rubric where the first column has the state standards directly in the rubric. And as you follow them across the rubric, you can see where they're embedded. So no longer can someone come in and say, well, you teach what you want. No. We teach the state standards. And with the standards, our teachers, that autonomy and that ownership that they have, create projects that are meaningful, exciting, and relevant to the students. And then the students get to create products from the end of the project with the design of the project briefcase. In all the scaffolding activities, spiraling in, the assessments built throughout, we ensure that students get not only the standards they need, but as well as the 21st century skills that we said as a school students have to have. A lot of times people come in and say, well, how about homework? Well, when you have a school that is focused on projects and is meaningful, you don't have to worry about homework because you have an advanced column. And that advanced column, the students are always working on their projects. So the question is, well, do they have a lot of homework? No. The question should be, how much time do they work on their projects outside of the class? And I will tell you, that is all the time. And we have to understand our students are not your straight A, top A students. Sure, we have a handful of students like that. But we have a lot of students who had huge, huge learning gaps when they came in. Sharon talked about one of the things about a STEM school is blended learning. And blended learning is an area now that we're focusing more and more on, especially at our school with STEM. A lot of STEM schools are focusing just on their curriculum, and what we're focusing on is how do we take it to the next level? How do we engage students on their time, anytime, anywhere, in any place? And through blended learning, students are able to collaborate and work on projects outside of the classroom and then come back into the classroom and come in and continue working on their projects. We had our digital dojo, which is on iTunes University, and our students give tech tips on how to use technology. And so anyone can log on. If you had a question on how to use iMovie, they'd show you how to use iMovie. We also use a system in our New Tech network called Echo, and it's our learning platform where we're able to collaborate and communicate with schools, teachers, and students all over the country. And finally, another tool that we use is YouTube. Currently, we have over 1,086 videos currently posted on our YouTube channel. And those are student products, teacher quality, that not only incorporate projects, but students get to tell their story. So someone comes in and they say, so tell me, what is STEM? Well, STEM is our focus. But if I told students you're going to learn math and science, they're going to shut down. What I have to do is get them excited about the projects. And in the projects, that's where they get the curriculum. And that's where they get the STEM. In fact, I dare say if you asked our students walking down the hall, so where's a STEM school? They wouldn't know what you were talking about. But they would tell you, we're in a project-based learning school. We're at Manor New Tech. Our focus, that invisible focus, is STEM. And when you look at students that are graduating with 5 math credits, 6 science credits, and 2 years of engineering, that's far and above what the state graduation requirements are. So how do I know what we're doing is any good? Well, you got to have validation. This is my 4th high school, and I've never had anyone come to me and say, hey, Steve, we want to research your school. Well, in the 5 years we've been open, we already have 5 case studies published on Manor New Tech. I got a call about 4 years ago from Harvard, and they said that we noticed that you had closed the achievement gap significantly. We'd like to fly you and a team of teachers to Harvard to tell us how you did that. We also have the Dana Center who came through, and they said we've been in hundreds of schools that say they're doing redesign and reform, but this is the only school we've ever been in that's doing what they say they're doing. And it's not because we're doing something significantly different than others, but what we're doing is we've got that accountability built into the projects, and that's a big piece. And when you can show students that are moving, that's what people want to know. And when you see students that are having success, that haven't traditionally had success, then you know you've hit the right place. How about, I think it was 2010, Arnie Duncan highlighted our school as a model school for reaching underserved youth. He didn't say a model STEM school, a model school. We don't go around and publish that we're a STEM school, even though our graduation requirements are higher than the comprehensive high school and higher than most STEM schools in the state of Texas with 6 science and 5 maths and 2 years of engineering. Most of our students take 3 years of engineering, and our engineering is through Project Lead the Way. So here's where I know we're doing well. I've got a 97.4 attendance rate. I can't get students to go home. I have to run a 5 o'clock bus to kick them out. They won't go home. And the 65 public speeches, this is where it comes in. Our students don't have the highest SAT and ACT scores. Not yet. They're getting there. But how would I ensure that our students have the opportunities of other students to get into the college of their choice? Well, if they've got a high school transcript that's showing 5 math credits, 6 science credits, and 2 years of engineering, most college admission counselors want to talk to that student. Once our students get in, if they get an interview, they're in because they can talk. Those 65 public speeches a year, that translates to over 200. It's really helped our students. And if you look at our last 2 graduating classes, that's a big story. We had, in our first graduating class, we had 100% of our students complete and 100% graduate, and 100% of those students were accepted into colleges and universities. 84% were accepted into 4-year universities, and 62% were first generation. Those are huge numbers. But we can always say that was a fluke. Let's see how we do on the next class. The next class came, and that was last year.
Hey,
we had
Stephen,
100.
I'm sorry, Stephen.
Yeah.
We're going to have to stop here because we've just got to get to questions now. I apologize for doing that, but
All right.
there's so many questions out there, and I think people got a pretty good idea. And your slides will be available, so if anyone wants to pick up, especially the data slide, people will be able to access that and see it for themselves. So with that, I'm going to go to the first question is one that I wanted to. I'll first ask this of you, Sharon, and Stephen, you should feel free to jump in too. We've gotten a number of questions from people who have existing schools that are looking to possibly convert into STEM schools. Sharon, do you know much about sort of the extent to which the STEM schools we're seeing now are brand new schools, or are these schools that are converting? And is there any early wisdom or even thoughts you would share about the advantages to starting from scratch versus taking a school and making the switch?
Oh boy, early wisdom seems difficult. I think we know so little in general about what's going on. I think there's some hunches that maybe starting a school from scratch might be a way to go because, you're starting with a new mission and philosophy, maybe locating new teachers and that sort of thing. But there have been schools that we're hearing about that have converted, there's a turnaround school that we're thinking about studying. We haven't asked their permission yet, so I won't name it, in North Carolina, where they're reporting all kinds of success. So I think it can go in any direction, but, as far as a formula, part of the reason why we're funded to do this study is to pick 12 of the best STEM schools we can find in the United States, the inclusive ones that are well established, and develop the most detailed models of what they're doing possible. You've got a wonderful look at Steve's school, but there are other models out there, and that's our hope to be able to document that.
Thanks, Sharon. Stephen, do you have any thoughts? As a principal of a school, you had the benefit of being able to start from scratch, but then you were the principal of other schools before that. Any thoughts about one track or the other, and advice to people, say, who would be more in the transition mode where they're trying to convert a school over?
Eric, we get lots of visitors that are in that same mode. They're looking at developing a STEM school, a school within a school, academy within the school. And I think in our New Tech network, probably half of them are, if not more, are school within a school. Sharon was right that starting a school up on your own from the beginning, you get to establish the culture and create that culture and that focus. I think some of the challenges of opening up a STEM within a school, and we've had a lot of success of New Tech schools that are opening up school within schools, is being able to establish that culture of the STEM school within that school culture itself. So implementing the content, I don't think is that big of an issue. I think the issue is going to be how do you establish that culture to get students to want to take the additional math and science classes and the technology classes to get them excited about that. And part of that is creating that culture.
Okay, thank you. Another question that I saw was about, and you mentioned, Stephen, that your school, it's an open enrollment school, but could you say a little bit about, the challenges, and Sharon, you could as well, or the challenges of sort of recruiting students, and are there any sort of selection criteria?
Well, I guess I'll address that one. When we opened the school, we opened with grades 9 and 10. So we took from the incoming 8th grade class and recruited from the current 9th grade class at the high school. And we knew that was going to be an issue because they had already been acclimated to that culture. And as summer came and went, we lost half the high school students. They decided to stay at the high school. But I would say since then, as we bring in students from the 8th grade class, recruiting them has not been an issue at all. A lot of times the parents want them to come. A lot of times the students, they come, they think it's a bunch of video games, and they find out quickly that it's not. And I think in our 5th year, they kind of know what to expect. Recruiting students is not an issue. There are no requirements, as we stated, but I do disaggregate the applications before we pick them. The only disaggregation we do is boys and girls, because we want to have, and if I get a hit on that, I'll take it. We want to have 50% boys and 50% girls. And currently, that's the makeup of our school. And we have 350 students or so. We're 50-50. But again, the application is only your name and address because board policy states in order to attend schools in Manor, you have to live in Manor, and that's it.
Sharon, any thoughts on recruiting and or selecting kids?
Well, I know that some of these inclusive STEM-focused schools do have some standards. They might be requiring students to read at and do mathematics at grade level. So these aren't exactly the standards you'd find in a highly selective school where kids are scoring huge SAT scores in 8th grade. But there are some minimum requirements. Sometimes one asks that students write an essay, teacher recommendations, but the point is they are more inclusive than exclusive or so highly selective. So there are some schools that are using some standards.
Mm-hmm. And is there any thoughts to sort of design elements? If we think about it, as you mentioned, historically there were these schools that were highly selective, and there's still plenty of them out there. Are there any fundamentals of design or approach that would be clearly differentiated between one of the new inclusive STEM schools versus one of these highly accelerated STEM academies?
Well, I think the older ones might be somewhat more discipline-based, but, we've got a couple of excellent selective STEM schools around here, and I know that the students do have some things in common. For instance, they're doing college-level work and sometimes even beyond while they're in high school. They are doing project-based work by the time they're in senior year. But I think in Steve's description and from what we've been reading about the inclusive STEM-focused schools, the project-based work seems to be more prevalent. It may be the disciplines may be more integrated or interdisciplinary, and the students' access to college might be more at the community college or at the four-year college level. So you've kind of got to recalibrate the college opportunities for the students you're working with. So both have a lot of potential, but the inclusive STEM-focused schools have to take the kids where they are and help them from that point.
Okay, thank you. Next, we're going to move to a curriculum question that a lot of people, Stephen, were intrigued, I think, and are wrapping their head around this idea of the integrated curriculum. Maybe you could give a very tangible example of what this looks like at your school.
Sure. So let's just take humanities. We have English 1 and World Geography, and we run in the curriculum, let's say we run 6-week bundles. But instead of 6-week bundles, we'll take 12 weeks because a project may last 3 weeks. It could last 4 weeks. A good project's 3 to 4 weeks long. And what they do is they take those 6-week standards in English and in World Geography, and as they design the project, they integrate those standards together. They're not taught individually and separately. They're taught together. So an example would be there was a project called What in the World, where students had to read parts of the Odyssey, and based upon reading the Odyssey, they had to create a new world based upon the Odyssey using World Geography standards, creating new landforms and identifying them and climate changes, and they had to put those together based upon reading the Odyssey. And then they had to create this project, and then they had to present. And I think one big difference is that students had that freedom and autonomy to know what to design the end product themselves. We knew what the scope was, but not the product. And so by putting those standards together is how you create projects. So your project, your year-long we don't do instruction for 6 weeks and then a project. All the standards are built in one project after the other, so everything is blended together. So if they have 5 classes a day, they have 5 projects going on at the same time. 2 of those classes are team taught or integrated classes. Typically they're math and science, so physics and algebra 2 becomes Philgebrics, and they put those together. environmental science and stats, scientific research and design, and pre-calculus. We used to run integrated physics and chemistry with Algebra 1, but that's IPC is no longer taught. So that's how we put those together.
Okay. We got a number of questions about what about the earlier grades, middle schools and even elementary schools? You know, should educators consider creating STEM elementary schools? Sharon, are you aware? I think I've heard of a few who at least call themselves that. I don't know exactly what that means or looks like at the lower grades, but can you sort of address this question of the extent to which anyone is doing that and any of the issues that might be different in contemplating work at the younger grades, earlier grades?
Well, you know, if you get online and look at who calls themselves a STEM-focused school, I mean, I think you're going to find from preschool through high school. So there are plenty of schools that are doing this. I think we might even know less about what constitutes good STEM education at the earlier levels, but I'm sitting in Washington, D.C., and I've been invited out to a pre-K through grade 12 elementary charter school called Eagle Elementary, and I'll give a shout-out to those wonderful people at Eagle. And I tell you, when you walk into this school, it's just the most exciting thing to see. Instead of what you could imagine the worst being, namely students being drilled at awful science and awful math, what you see is just this complete combination of learning the basics, really fundamental ideas about numbers or science ideas, but it seems to be well integrated with play and art. You just can't separate them. It's a beautiful school. I don't have achievement data on this. All I know is that, for what I know as a seasoned educator, when you walk into the school, it looks like it's possible to do some really interesting things with young kids in STEM without turning them off. That would be the worst thing in the world.
Yeah. Stephen, do you think it's a good idea to think about STEM schools at the younger grades, or do you think it's more of a thing for high school and beyond?
Well, I definitely think we need to, it can be younger grades. But I think what need to look at is, you know, I think your question ties into your previous question about, you know, the schools, the all-inclusive schools or the focus schools. And I think that depends on what a district's sense of urgency is. I mean, if we've had the science and math schools around for 20, 30 years, but yet we're still having this lack of STEM. We need students to graduate with STEM focus, then we have to hit students that are not that upper echelon and include students that we typically haven't targeted, those underrepresented students. And by taking that down into the lower grades, into the middle school and the elementary, you just develop that, you start developing that sequencing or that culture that, you know, we're going to do math and science. And it's not just a drudgery thing, we're going to do math and science, but if they're relevant and meaningful and exciting to the students, you build that capacity so by the time they get to the high school, they're ready to go. And as you build that capacity, those students who normally wouldn't have been those targeted students, you'll be surprised that you'll find students who come out of the woodwork and get excited about math and science when they find there's relevancy to why they have to learn that. So definitely agree that we could find a way to get into elementary and middle schools.
Okay, great. You know, one of the things that's comes up a lot these days when I've been doing reporting on STEM is the connections to the economy and the push for an innovative and creative workforce. Sharon, what's your early impressions of the extent to which STEM schools are focused as well on creativity, given the special interest that a lot of people in the business world and elsewhere have in terms of sort of marrying together the STEM knowledge and skills with the creativity?
Well, I think that's part of the hope of these schools. There's a lot of interest in innovation in the business community, but not only the business community. I think the people in the arts communities people in their communities who are concerned about environmental issues or social issues, these are all things that the potential to do integrated education or cross or transdisciplinary kinds of things are really important. So, yeah, we do hear from the business community loud and clear that they're looking for innovation in some of the 21st century skills that Steve has mentioned. But that's probably not the only thing. I also would say that nobody could have lived through the last 3 or 4 years in the United States without having been sort of rocked by business-related economic woes. And I think while we invite the business community in, they've been a terrific impetus. I think the community itself, in all its fullness, has to be careful about, what the best interests are in the students. People want jobs, but they also want well-educated, thinking people. I don't necessarily see a conflict here, but I think as a researcher, you'd also have to keep your eyes open for that kind of thing.
Stephen, at your school, to what extent are you focused on creativity, and how do you try to foster it in the students?
Well, creativity, innovation is a prerequisite here. So I would say creativity, by the projects alone, they spark and initiate creativity not only with the teachers but in the students. Every student wants to be able to tell their story. And when they're able to tell their story in a creative way by using in math and science and technology and engineering as well as the arts, then that student is going to be better prepared to go out into the workforce. And when I have the business partners that I have multiple business partners, and every one of them says that we need students who have these other skills. Content is definitely important, don't get me wrong. But if we just teach content, that is not going to get our students prepared for the workforce. And not only workforce, but for collaboration and critical thinking. I don't know of any professions that you don't have to collaborate with other individuals. And teaching those skills to our students who don't have those skills is a huge benefit for our students to go on into the business world after graduating from college.
If I can add one more thing really quickly, it's not only creativity, but it's production. In these schools, students are producing things. They're making things. They're making new things. Whether they're using math in a way that actually helps them to solve a problem that's a real-world problem, or using technology to write music or something like that. So it's about production as well. And I think if you listen to the High Tech High folks and Larry Rosenstock, it's just inspiring to think about a school that results in something other than producing bubbles on a test score, but real things that kids care about.
Right.
Absolutely.
Stephen, back to you with this another question which picks up on, I'm glad you mentioned the issue of partnerships, with businesses and others, because we've had a number of questions about that. Maybe you could just say a little more briefly about the kinds of partnerships you have. And there was one question in particular, too, about how, you might get STEM professionals into the classroom, which I'm guessing sort of goes hand in hand with some of those partnerships.
Oh, absolutely. So I'll give you a couple examples. One is after projects, our students have to present. And typically those panels are made up of professionals from the business world, some parents. Very seldom is it the panels are the students presenting to other students and to the teacher. So it takes on a whole different meaning when you get professionals in there from that field that the project was on, and then they have to present to to those experts there. It just takes on a different meaning. So we use our businesses to come in and sit on panels. But another way, I'm just going to use a high-tech company that came in, and they wanted to start a FIRST Robotics team with us. We had never done FIRST Robotics. In fact, we didn't know what we were doing when we did BEST Robotics. But they wanted to work with us, and so we launched a FIRST Robotics team with this high-tech company. But one of the requirements is that every student will graduate with a capstone project or an internship. And it's very difficult for students to get internships at the high-tech companies. And part of that is because it takes too much time to train new engineers. So what we did is we developed a memorandum of understanding with this high-tech company, and what they did is they sent engineers over to help us with FIRST robotics. And then when the students graduated, if they were in FIRST robotics, that high-tech company gave our students a letter and said that they did an internship with that company because they worked with the engineering. So that's thinking outside of the box, still accomplishing what we needed to at the campus, but at the same time benefited the company because they have to do community outreach, most companies, and it was a way for them to have a meaningful relationship with students in our community. And so that was just one way that we partnered with a company outside. We also partnered.
Just because in the interest of time, I'm going to get to one or two more questions. I know we're getting tight. Sharon, what about the issue of sort of what a state or district can or needs to do to facilitate, the opening of more STEM schools? Are there any sort of policy barriers or incentives that states and districts either are contemplating or might contemplate to help make this happen?
Well, it's pretty clear that different states have taken different approaches to these inclusive STEM schools. Steve is in a school that has the T-STEM network. I believe that there's something like 50 of these schools in Texas, and Steve is obviously at one that's functioning really, really well. It's a question of whether the other ones are doing that. So some states have built models into their plans, which, would include professional development and some notion about a critical mass of teachers and ideas about where things are going. Other states, I think, have taken the position that, no, we want our good STEM education within all our schools. We don't want to specialize in this way. So I think you have to kind of look at that. I believe Gene Century and our Researchers Without Borders are taking a close look at how the state of Ohio has developed a series of consortia that help develop STEM education in Ohio. It's been going on for about 20 years, and it's advancing. Another state is the state of Washington, has developed small groups of collaborations between colleges and universities, business and industry to move STEM education along. So there's lots of good collaboratives. Virginia has some examples as well.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Stephen, is there a good example in Texas? Has the state been helpful? Or I'm guessing your district, obviously this is a district-run school, right? So they had to be committed to it.
It is, but the state's been very helpful with the Texas High School Project in developing the STEM. But another thing that's been helpful is educating the higher ed and having higher ed come in, and they're looking at their programs, especially at the teacher development programs, to prepare the teachers to, when they graduate from college, that they're ready to come in and address STEM and a different pedagogical shift in the way they deliver their instruction and reach their students. And UTeach is a perfect example of that.
Right. I'm glad you both. I'm going to make the last question that piggybacks on the higher education issue, which is, and especially considering in your school, Stephen, where there's a little bit of an unorthodox approach, you might say, with the project-based learning and the intensive STEM study. How does that fit with what selective colleges expect and want? And have you had to have conversations to explain to them, this is what we're doing and this is why our kids are prepared? And if there's time, Sharon, maybe you can say a little bit about what you've heard from STEM schools elsewhere. Are they struggling to sort of make what they do fit with higher education and the expectations there?
Well, I think the prognosis is really good. For one thing, I heard somebody say recently that the only places where we're going to have disciplinary science is going to be in the K through 16 education system, because research has certainly gone into a interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary mode, and it's just not the way businesses run these days either. So I think colleges are getting ready. I know at my university there's more and more interest in a different kind of freshman who's able to do well. The advanced placement people as well are changing the AP exams and the AP curriculum to do more of this kind of thing, and more integration, I think, is planned in the not too far distant future. So, and the last thing I would say, too, is these kids who are coming in with these experiences that Steve has described in the early college credits, that's got to help.
Right. Stephen, what about your experience?
I'd piggyback on what Sharon said. We don't offer any AP classes, but what we offer is dual credit, that instant gratification. And so our students who typically haven't been college-going community in the past, I would say 5-6 years ago, what we've seen is because they are getting into school, because of the college credits that they are getting, and because of the curriculum and the different learning outcomes. In fact, we've had students come back from college saying that in our classes now, we're putting together projects and we have to work in teams. Well, they always work in teams here, 2 to 3 or 3 to 4. And so what we're seeing is more higher ed looking at ways to reach students and moving away from the traditional model into more of PBL model or a challenge-based learning model to where students can get this hands-on and at the same time feel like they're learning something and it's relevant to them.
Well, unfortunately, we've run out of time, and there's plenty more questions that I was hoping to get to. But once again, I want to thank Sharon Lynch and Stephen Zipkis for their presentations and for fielding all the questions. And thanks so much to our audience today for helping to make this an engaging discussion. Really some great questions there. As I mentioned earlier, an archive of today's discussion and the PowerPoint slides will be available at www.edweek.org within 24 hours. Thanks again, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.